They took my brother. I'm afraid they'll take me next. My brother Eric and I were best friends ever since he came into the world. I read to him often, and he would look up with his large eyes in fascination and smile. We played peekaboo endlessly, and his giggling filled the room. When he started crawling, I crawled along with him and let him chase me. He would roar in laughter when he finally caught up. Then when he started running, we would play in the yard for hours, hiding behind the large oak trees on our property. We would play tag, sneaking into the barn and hiding behind hay bales, our uncontainable laughter giving away our position. Our parents would also join in from time to time. Those years hold the fondest memories for me. Of simpler times when we didn't have a care in the world. Until they came. At first, my brother and I noticed strange lights in the sky every so often, a rare occurrence in the beginning. Balls of light and color danced above the twilight landscape, eventually vanishing when the darkness settled over everything. As the years passed, the frequency increased, and it seemed the night was their favorite time to pay us a visit. I remember this one time in the early spring. The night was chilly and the windows were frosted up. Well, I woke up late to my room filled with light. The clock on my nightstand glowed red, displaying 2:14 a.m. I remember that memory vividly, deeply etched into my brain. I ran to the window, knowing full well that it wasn't daytime yet, but unable to make out any detail from the all-encompassing brightness that burned outside. However, I did notice Eric's standing statue still in front of the barn. His eyes were large and mouth wide open. I screamed so loud. I didn't even realize it until my parents stood in front of me, hands clasped tightly around my shoulders, shaking me out of my stupor. "What's wrong, Vanessa?" they asked urgently. It took me a moment to realize the light was gone and my brother was no longer standing outside. I fought to remember the events that took place, but they were becoming hazy, like a long-forgotten dream. But the time 2:14 was still burned into my mind. I looked over at the clock. 3:26. I whispered to myself. My parents shot a look at each other and tried to console me with a hug, reassuring me that everything was all right. "Just a bad dream," they said. But that didn't stop me from running to Eric's room. I threw open the door. There he was, fast asleep in his bed. Seems he didn't even wake up during my panic. I began doubting the event altogether. Surely it had to be a nightmare. But it had felt so real. The next morning, I found Eric sitting at the breakfast table with my parents. My mother finished the last pancakes in the cast iron pan before setting them on a plate, piled high and steaming hot. I waved to them and sat myself down, still thinking about the events that had transpired last night while everyone began eating their breakfast. "Aren't you going to eat?" my dad asked, raising a bushy eyebrow beneath his thick-rimmed glasses. He smiled playfully, dropping a couple of pancakes onto my plate. My mother gave a tight-lipped smile and poured a generous helping of syrup onto the golden discs. "Yes, definitely," I said, returning the smile. I dug in. They seemed to relax, no doubt thinking about what happened. We all chatted, and my brother seemed to be his usual self, laughing and messily eating. Maybe it was all just a bad dream. My dad left the room to finish getting ready while my mom cleared the table. Then I leaned over to my brother and began asking him a few questions. "Hey Eric, how'd you sleep last night?" I paused in between bites to look over at him, curious for more information. "Really good," he said. I must have been tired. I didn't even wake up once. He flashed me a wide grin filled with partially chewed pancakes and a gap where his front tooth should be. "That's good." "Me too," I said dismissively. I didn't want to tell him about my nightmare. But I was glad that's all it was. "But I did have a strange dream though," he interjected suddenly. A cold shiver ran through my body, signaling something terrible to come. Eric smacked his lips and finished a mouthful of food before gulping down the last of his milk. "I dreamt I was outside by the barn," he said, wiping his lips with his forearm. My mouth dropped. I felt the severity of what I saw come flooding back. Then he continued. I just remember following colored lights out the front door and watching them spin and move. They were really pretty. Then I woke up. I couldn't believe it. Either we both shared the same dream, or whatever I experienced was somehow real. Nausea grew in the pit of my stomach, filling me with an overwhelming sense of dread, and I fought hard not to vomit all over the table. Eric didn't think much of it, because he just yelled "finished" and brought his plate over to my mom with a smile. I sat there in disbelief, and for the entire day, I remained transfixed on the alarming implications. Nothing happened for a long time after that, until one night in the fall later that year. The trees had already started to change color, the greens giving way to a sea of red, orange, and yellow. Our property was very much isolated, surrounded by trees in every direction. The closest neighbor was about a 20-minute drive up the road. At that time, Eric and I would play out front after school until my parents called us in for dinner. We'd run and jump in the leaves, hiding under the piles and scaring our dad when he came out to check on us. He would chase us, roaring and screaming. We laughed so much. Well, that night, just like the last time, I was woken by a bright light at the same time. 2:14 a.m. This time around, I felt so groggy. I still managed to run over to the window but was blinded by the brightness shining down. I reeled back, covering my eyes, and stumbled to my parents' room. "Mom, Dad!" I screamed, "Come quick!" But they were unresponsive. I shook them repeatedly, but they didn't wake up. At the time, I didn't understand what was happening. I still don't. Then I heard little footsteps running through the hallway. I stepped out, and the footsteps continued down the stairs and out the front door. Eric left his room. For what reason, I don't know. He was outside again, just like last time. I chased after him, jumping several steps and landing on the main floor with a hard thud. I picked myself up and ran through the open door. I covered my eyes from the light above. A terrible humming filled the air that made me feel sick. I looked over at the barn and saw the open door slowly close. I ran across the cold grass, the light above me pulsing, thinking only of my brother. I just wanted to protect him. To keep him safe. I threw the door wide open. I could hear rustling above me in the loft, so I quickly jumped onto the ladder and started climbing. The brightness outside was beaming in through all the cracks and crevices, lighting up the inside as if it were day. But I continued upward. One of the hay bales shook in the corner, and I knew it was Eric hiding, afraid of whatever was there. But as I approached, a strange shadow rose from behind the cover and continued rising until it loomed over me. It was tall, at least 7 feet, disproportionately thin, with arms that stretched almost to the floor. Its skin looked like a gray shade of green, but the most disturbing thing about it was its face. Or lack thereof. The head was unusually small, possessing no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. It tilted its head sideways as if assessing me, and then it took a step forward that shook the upper level. I screamed and fell back, disturbed to my very core. I wanted so badly to wake up, but I knew it wasn't a dream. I scooted back until the ladder pressed against me, and I threw myself over the edge, barely holding on. I managed several steps down before it reached out to grab me, but I slipped and fell straight down. The bright lights drifted in and out of focus as my vision faded to black. The humming was ever present, filling my ears with a strange pulse. My memories flashed before my eyes, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. Slowly, I came to and regained my sight, eyes fixed on the barn ceiling, and there was the creature, standing at the top of the ladder, looking down at me. I staggered out of there, barely having enough strength to open the door, but when I stepped outside, I noticed my brother, still up in his room, looking out the window. But he was not alone. Beside him stood another one of those creatures, also watching me. The next few minutes were a blur as I ran back into the house, stomping up the stairs. Dazzling lights shone through from beneath Eric's bedroom door. I screamed, rattling the doorknob, twisting it, wanting it to give way and open, but it wouldn't. It felt like I had been standing there for hours, trying furiously to open the door. I began throwing my body into it, wanting nothing more than to save my brother, my best friend. I threw myself into the door over and over again, until finally it gave way and I found myself lying flat on my face. The lights had stopped, and it was dark again. All was quiet. And my brother was gone. In the night sky, I could see several colored lights twinkling as they spun in unison and gradually receded out of view. Then I noticed the handprint on the glass, a grotesque imprint with abnormally long fingers. And as I sat there with tears welling up in my eyes, the mark slowly vanished, and I was left with nothing but a memory. Suffice it to say, my parents didn't believe me. They started fighting more often and yelling at each other. Things never returned to normal. How could they? The police said I was traumatized, but I know what I saw. I returned to the barn and found strange footprints that could have matched the mark on the window, but yet again, they said I had just imagined those things. That nothing could leave those marks. I felt so defeated. To have seen what I did and be treated like I was crazy. They never did find any leads in the case. I knew they wouldn't. I miss Eric so much. I miss hearing his laugh and his noisy feet running through the house. I still think about him all the time. I hope I get to see him someday. It's already been so long. But I've been seeing the lights in the sky again. I don't think it'll be much longer. I think they'll be back soon. And maybe I'll get to see Eric again. But I'll just have to wait and see.